one of the things that we wanted to talk about too is that we do think that anarchists can learn a lot about intersectionality. One of the things that we can do is we can quit having these stupid ass conversations about which relation of domination is the most important, or which always needs to take strategic priority. When in fact, when it comes to struggles against relations of domination, it's highly context dependent. It depends on what you're organizing around. So when we say it all needs to be fought, it doesn't mean that we all always have to go out and fight everything all at one time. And in fact, when you're doing workplace organizing, oftentimes class does take a priority. But there are also contexts, like I know a lot of people in the United States who do prison abolition work, where race takes a strategic priority. It can't be denied in the United States. All you got to do is look at a prison population to see how race, in many ways, has just a huge influence on what our prison population looks like. The other part of the conversation, though, is that we think that feminists who use an intersectional analysis, and I think you'd agree with me too if I said mostly academic feminists, because unfortunately I think it's probably more common in college campuses than
in the nonprofit world.
Yeah, definitely. Is that I think they can learn from anarchists too. So we want to talk about two things that they can learn from anarchists. And one is an analysis of the state and of the state form as a relation of domination. It's unfortunate that the ways that intersectionality is built up around identities, that oftentimes we kind of lose these larger institutional analyses of institutions like the state, which is an institution based on, hierarchy, domination, coercion, control. It's anti-participation, and it's a way of controlling working people. It's the institution that basically manages class antagonisms, as well as antagonisms around other relations of domination. So we feel like, that this is a two-way street. If anarchists are going to learn from feminists and from intersectionality, they need to learn from us as well. The things that they need to learn is that we need a radical analysis of the state, one that sees the abolition of the state actually as part of any liberatory goal. It means that in order to build a truly radical or revolutionary perspective, then we need to build into our perspective not the idea that we need to create a kinder and gentler state or a kinder and gentler form of domination, but an analysis that, actually roots power in working class communities and not in this, this institution that rules over us above society and unaccountable. We need to build a different form of polity. And in order to do that, we need to be able to confront the state and to eventually smash it and develop different kinds of social relations that are based on large-scale participation rather than representation.
And the other piece that I think I've seen a lot of intersectional feminists fall short on, and I don't think it's necessarily through a weakness of the theory, but more so a misinterpretation and a misunderstanding of it in theory and practice, largely because the identity politics framework is such a dominant way of understanding, like on the left anyway, a dominant way of understanding social oppression is the class analysis that was and it was a Marxist. There was some kind of anti-capitalist class analysis at the root of intersectionality when it was being developed. But I feel like that's sort of been lost somewhere along the way in a lot of circles, because one of the biggest things that you hear people discuss now is classism versus talking about capitalism. And so, and what is sort of implied in that is that what the goal is for us to all be nice to poor people. And so if everyone was just nice to people who are poor, then that's like the end goal. Or even, they might even reach higher for like a living wage or something like that. But it's definitely, it's implied that class is an identity, and that the solution is that we should be working towards is a nicer, friendlier capitalism, but still capitalism. And so I definitely think that one of the things that people who use intersectionality as can really draw from anarchists is like an explicit anti-capitalist class analysis, and also we sort of argued over who got to say this piece, because it's both of our pet peeves that there's this focus on classism and class as an identity and ignoring of like a really revolutionary class analysis, which is unfortunately missing in the United States, in particular, like missing from the left in a big way.
I think one of the things too is you'll see circles of people sit around and wring their hands and talk about how privileged they are, about around certain identities, and that doesn't account for the complex ways that different identities we inhabit intersect. The other thing is this we oppose racism, sexism, and classism thing does is, it makes it sound like we want this wealthy capitalist to be kind to us rather than we want a class struggle that ends class society. We don't want an end to classism. We want an end to class. And I think that that's probably, again, it's her and I both kind of pet peeve about how it gets utilized in some circles. So.
Oh, and also with that, I think one of the things that it confuses is it conflates things inaccurately. Because I think that, we don't need to be oversimplifying capitalism or oversimplifying white supremacy. And so by saying that these are interlocking systems of power that prop each other up and are interdependent doesn't mean that they're all the same and that they all act similarly and should be organized against similarly even. Like there's different, like how they interact with each other. Like these are distinct systems of power that like you can't always, it's not always useful to conflate them. And so I think that's part of why classism is a pet peeve of mine, is because it seems to me to be an effort to make it to oversimplify the system of capitalism in such a way that makes it easier to address, just like you would address in the same way other systems of oppression, if that makes sense.
I think that's actually a fairly important point. I mean, the argument here isn't that class is special in this regard. The argument here is that all of these different systems of oppression are unique in their own ways. One of the ways that class is unique is that both of us would argue for a war between classes. I would never argue for a race war. That's something that Nazis want. It's unique in that regard, and there are similar unique characteristics of other forms of hierarchy. Sexuality is probably one of the easiest ones to point out, because this thing that we call sexual identity didn't even exist until like the 1800s, when some sexual scientists decided that when men have sex with men or women have sex with women, it wasn't something that you do. Now it became something that you are, and it became an identity. And that makes it unique in some ways. Part of the struggle against, heteronormativity means, a commitment to the limits of how identities and identity politics,
framework.
Yeah, speak more than
just to clarify real quick, the reason why I always tack on the as a framework piece when I talk about identity politics is because I don't want people to confuse me with the folks who talk about the identity politics and I dismiss identity politics as a way of silencing dialogue around race and gender, because I definitely have seen that phenomenon where people are like, stop, identity politics is bad, and it's really just about people not wanting to talk about race, gender, sexuality, ability, all these different things. And so what I'm specifically arguing against is identity politics, the framework, the theory of identity politics as a way of understanding and approaching and organizing against social oppression. So that's my little fine print disclaimer at the bottom.